Welcome, dear traveler, to another journey through the misted corridors of ancient memory. Tonight, we walk together along paths worn smooth by countless generations of dreamers, storytellers, and seekers who came before us. The hour grows late. The world outside your window settles into its evening rhythms. And here we are, you and I, preparing to embark upon a voyage that will carry us through the entire span of this night, through all the gentle hours between now and dawn's first whisper. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight. Whether you rest beneath northern stars or southern skies. Whether the moon outside your window waxes or wanes. Whether rain taps against glass or snow falls silent upon rooftops. Wherever you are, know that you are joining a great, invisible gathering of souls who seek the old stories, the deep stories, the stories that run like underground rivers beneath the surface of our hurried days. Here on Boring Mythology, we tell these tales in the old way, the slow way, the way they were meant to be told when time moved differently, when a single story could unfold across an entire evening, when the rhythm of words themselves became a kind of music that carried listeners from waking into dreaming and back again. Tonight, we turn our attention to one of the most famous figures in all of Greek mythology. Yet we shall approach him not with the thunder and fury so often associated with his name, but with gentleness, with quietude, with the kind of careful attention one might give to examining an ancient piece of pottery by candlelight, turning it slowly in one's hands, feeling the weight of centuries in its clay. Heracles, or Hercules as the Romans would later call him, a name that echoes through millennia, a name that has become synonymous with strength, with impossible tasks, with the very limits of human endurance. But tonight, we shall discover him anew, not as the mighty hero of 1,000 battles, but as something quieter, deeper, more essential. We shall find in his story not just feats of strength, but teachings of wisdom, not just labors, but lessons, not just conquest, but transformation. Imagine, if you will, the world as it was 3,000 years ago, when these stories first began to take their shape around fires in the Greek countryside. The air smells of wood smoke and wild thyme. Sheep bells ring faintly in the distance. The stars above are brilliant in a way our modern eyes rarely witness. Each constellation a story, each story a teaching. Each teaching a thread in the great tapestry of human understanding. In those days, stories were not entertainment in the way we think of it now. They were medicine, they were maps, they were instructions for living, encoded in narrative, wrapped in adventure, sweetened with wonder so that they might be remembered, retold, passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. And the story of Heracles, with its 12 great labors, was among the most precious of all, for it contained within it a complete journey of the human soul from darkness into light, from bondage into freedom, from mortality towards something that transcends death itself. Let us begin by understanding that the Heracles we shall meet tonight is not the cartoon figure of modern imagination, all bulging muscles and simple-minded bravado. No, the Heracles of the ancient tales was a complex figure, a man caught between two worlds, the divine and the mortal, the civilized and the wild, the rational and the passionate. He was born of Zeus, king of the gods, and Alcmene, a mortal woman, and this dual nature would define every moment of his existence, pulling him in directions that would tear a lesser being apart. But before we speak of his labors, before we trace the long path of his journey, let us first speak of beginnings, of how things start, of the moment when a life tips from ordinary into extraordinary. For Heracles, this tipping point came not in glory, but in tragedy, not in triumph, but in madness, not in clarity, but in the darkest confusion a human heart can know. Picture a man in the prime of his life, blessed with strength beyond measure, married to a woman he loves, father to children who fill his house with laughter. Picture him standing in his courtyard at sunset, perhaps watching his children play, perhaps thinking nothing more complex than what wine to serve with the evening meal. This is Heracles before the storm, Heracles in his happiness, Heracles when life seemed simple and good and full of promise. Then comes the madness, sent by Hera, queen of the gods, who has hated him since before his birth, for he is living proof of her husband's infidelity. The madness comes like a dark cloud across the sun, like a wave that rises from nowhere to swallow ships whole. In this madness, Heracles commits an act so terrible that even now, 3,000 years later, we speak of it in hushed tones. In his madness, he destroys what he loves most, his children, his wife, his entire world, shattered in foams of blind fury that he cannot even remember when the darkness lifts. Imagine waking from such a nightmare to find it was no dream. Imagine the weight of such knowledge settling upon your shoulders like a mountain. This is where the true story of Heracles begins, not in his divine birth, not in his early adventures, but in this moment of absolute devastation, when everything he was has been destroyed, and he must decide what he will become. The ancient Greeks understood something we sometimes forget in our modern world, that the greatest journeys begin not in strength, but in weakness, not in certainty, but in confusion, not in heroism, but in the simple, desperate need to find a way forward when all paths seem blocked. And so, Heracles, broken, lost, drowning in guilt, that threatens to pull him under completely, does the only thing he can do. He seeks guidance. He travels to the oracle at Delphi, that sacred place where the god Apollo speaks through mortal lips, where the veil between worlds grows thin, where answers come in riddles and riddles contain truth. The oracle speaks, and her words will shape the next 12 years of his life, though he does not know this yet. She tells him he must serve. He must place himself under the command of his cousin, King Eurystheus of Tiryns, a weak man, a cowardly man, a man who represents everything Heracles is not. For 12 years, he must obey this lesser king, must complete whatever tasks are set before him, no matter how impossible, no matter how degrading, no matter how they might seem to mock his divine heritage. This is atonement in its truest form, not simply punishment, but transformation through service, redemption through surrender, wisdom through the voluntary acceptance of bonds that could easily be broken, but must not be. Heracles, who could level cities with his strength, must learn to bow. Heracles, who could challenge the gods themselves, must learn to obey. Heracles, who has been brought low by divine cruelty, must find a way to rise not through revenge, but through endurance. And so begin the labors, those 12 great tasks that will take him to the edges of the known world and beyond, that will test not just his legendary strength, but every aspect of his being, his intelligence, his compassion, his ability to accept help, his understanding of what true strength really means. Each labor is a teaching disguised as a trial. Each monster he faces is also an aspect of himself he must confront. Each impossible task is a door that, once opened, reveals new dimensions of what it means to be human in a world where gods and mortals, monsters and heroes, the civilized and the wild, all exist in uneasy proximity to one another. First comes the lion, the Nemean lion, whose golden pelt cannot be pierced by any weapon forged by mortal hands. This is no ordinary beast, but a creature of divine origin. Dropped from the moon, some say, raised by Hera herself, say others, placed in the hills above Nemea to terrorize the local population, to be a plague upon the innocent, to be the kind of problem that has no solution until Heracles arrives. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we follow him into that first labor, let us pause and consider what we're really talking about when we speak of these ancient stories. We're talking about patterns, patterns that repeat in every human life, patterns that we recognize even if we've never heard these particular stories before. the lion that cannot be defeated by conventional means. Haven't we all faced such lions? The stable that cannot be cleaned by ordinary effort. Don't we all have such stables in our lives? The birds that rain down poison from above. Don't we all know what it is to be attacked by things we cannot reach, cannot touch, cannot fight in any normal way? These stories survived not because ancient people were simple and we are sophisticated, but because they contain truths that remain true no matter how much the world changes. The external details may shift. We no longer fear literal monsters in the wilderness, but the internal landscape remains remarkably consistent. We still struggle with our own dual natures, still seek redemption for our failures, still must find ways to complete impossible tasks, still must learn that true strength is not always what it appears to be. Tonight, as we journey through these labors together, we shall discover that each one contains layers upon layers of meaning, like those Russian dolls that nest one inside another, each revealing something new as it opens. We shall see how the lion's pelt becomes not just armor, but a new identity, how cleansing rivers teaches lessons about the power of redirection, how capturing sacred deer speaks to the pursuit of the ineffable, how binding bronze-beaked birds reveals the importance of rhythm and sound in overcoming chaos. We shall explore how these labors were not really tests at all, but teachings, each one preparing Heracles for the next, each one adding another piece to the mosaic of wisdom he is slowly, painfully, necessarily assembling. We shall see how the geography of his labors traces a kind of spiral, moving outward from the center of the Greek world to its very edges and beyond, each journey taking him further from the familiar, closer to the mysterious, deeper into realms where the normal rules no longer apply. We shall trace the connections between earthly labors and celestial patterns, for many of these stories are written in the stars themselves. The lion becomes Leo. The hydra has its own constellation, the boar, the bull, all lifted into the night sky where they wheel eternally, reminding us that these stories belong not just to the past, but to the eternal present, the always now of mythological time, where every story is always beginning, always unfolding, always ending, always beginning again. The hills above Nemea rise gentle and golden in the late summer heat, covered with dry grass that whispers in the wind, dotted with olive trees whose silver-green leaves shimmer like scales of some slumbering dragon. This is shepherd country, or was before the lion came. Now the shepherds have fled to the town below, leaving their flocks to scatter or be devoured, leaving the hills empty save for the occasional bleached bone glinting white in the unforgiving sun. First, the silence strikes you, walking these abandoned slopes. No bells, no bleating, no human voices calling across the valleys. Then the emptiness, the sense of absence where presence should be, the feeling that the land itself holds its breath, waiting. Then, if you know what to look for, the signs, great claw marks on tree trunks gouged deep into living wood, prints in the dust larger than a man's head, the remains of kills, scattered, gnawed, left to the ravens and the flies. This is the kingdom of the Nemean Lion, though kingdom is perhaps too grand a word for what is essentially a reign of terror, a circle of fear drawn around one creature's hunting ground. Yet, in another sense, kingdom is exactly right, for the lion rules here with absolute authority, acknowledging no power greater than its own, accepting no challenge to its dominion, allowing no trespass, without extracting the ultimate price. The people of Nemea have tried everything. The bravest hunters have climbed these hills with spears and bows, with nets and traps, with every weapon and stratagem known to their craft. Some never returned. Others came back with stories that grew in the telling, stories of arrows that bounced off golden hide, of spears that shattered like twigs, of swords that bent rather than bit, of a creature that seemed not just strong, but somehow beyond the reach of mortal weapons, as if it existed partly in this world and partly in some other realm where different rules applied. They say its eyes burn like coals in the darkness of its cave. They say its roar can be heard for miles, a sound that freezes the blood, that stops the heart, that speaks to some ancient part of the human mind that remembers when we were prey, when the night held real terrors, when survival was never certain. They say it moves like liquid gold through the landscape, beautiful and terrible in equal measure, a piece of divinity fallen to earth and turned monstrous. Into this emptied landscape comes Heracles, walking alone, carrying only his club, that massive piece of olive wood he tore from the earth with his own hands, roots and all, and shaped into a weapon through nothing more than his grip and his will. He could have brought an army. Eurystheus probably expected him to, probably hoped he would, for surely that would have been the sensible thing, to treat this as a military problem requiring a military solution. But Heracles understands something that Eurystheus does not. This first labor is not about the lion at all. It is about transformation. And transformation is always, ultimately, a solitary journey. As he climbs the hills, following tracks that grow fresher with each passing hour, Heracles thinks about pelts and what they mean. Every animal wears its identity in its skin. the deer's dappled coat that disappears in forest shadow, the snake's scales that whisper across stone, the bird's feathers that carry it between earth and sky. Humans, almost alone among creatures, must make their own pelts, must choose what to wrap themselves in, must decide what identity to wear into the world. He thinks about his own skin, marked with scars from battles he can barely remember, toughened by sun and wind and rain. This mortal covering that contains his divine heritage, like a wineskin holds wine, always threatening to burst from the pressure within. He thinks about the lion skin he wore as a baby, when Hera sent serpents to kill him in his cradle, and he strangled them with his infant hands, and his mother found him playing with their bodies like toys. Even then, the pattern was being established. The hero who must face monsters, who must prove his right to exist in a world that seems determined to destroy him. The sun begins its descent toward the western mountains, painting the world in shades of gold and amber, and Heracles knows he is close. There's a smell in the air now, musky and wild, the scent of a great predator that has never known fear, never known defeat, never known any will but its own. It's coming from a cave ahead, a black mouth in the hillside, surrounded by bones that gleam like offerings at some terrible shrine. Heracles approaches slowly, not from fear, but from respect. This is a sacred moment, the moment before everything changes, the moment when one story ends and another begins. He studies the cave entrance, notes how the bones are arranged, not randomly scattered, but placed almost deliberately, like a warning or perhaps a boast. This lion is not just a beast. It has intelligence, purpose, perhaps even a kind of dark pride in its work. From the darkness of the cave comes a sound, breathing, deep and rhythmic, the sound of something massive at rest, but never truly asleep, never truly off guard. Heracles picks up a stone and throws it into the cave, hearing it clatter against invisible walls, echo in spaces he cannot see. The breathing stops. Then, slowly, 2 points of light appear in the darkness, golden red like molten metal, like tiny suns burning in the void. The lion emerges slowly, deliberately, with the confidence of an apex predator that has never met its equal. It is, quite simply, the most magnificent creature Heracles has ever seen. Its mane catches the dying sunlight and seems to burn with its own fire. Its muscles ripple beneath that impervious hide like waves beneath golden silk. It is perfect in its power, terrible in its beauty, divine in its absolute self-assurance. For a long moment, hero and monster regard each other across the broken ground. The lion's tail lashes once, twice, like a thought being considered and dismissed. Its claws extend and retract, extend and retract, a casual display of weapons that have never failed. Heracles shifts his grip on his club, feeling the wood warm and familiar in his hands, knowing already that it will not be enough, that nothing he carries will be enough, that this battle will have to be won by other means. The lion attacks without warning, a golden blur of motion that covers the distance between them in a heartbeat. Heracles swings his club with all his might. A blow that would shatter stone, that would fell an oak, that would crush any normal creature's skull like an egg. The club connects with a sound like thunder and shatters. The olive wood, hard as iron, explodes into splinters against that impossible hide, leaving Heracles holding a useless stub. The lion lands, turns, regards him with what might almost be amusement. It attacks again, and this time Heracles doesn't try to strike. Instead, he catches the great beast in mid-leap, his hands finding purchase in that magnificent mane. His divine strength meeting its divine invulnerability in a contest that has no precedent, no rules, no certain outcome. They roll across the ground, predator and hero, locked in an embrace that is almost intimate in its closeness. The lion's claws, each one like a curved dagger, rake across Heracles' back, finding flesh, drawing blood, reminding him that while the lion cannot be harmed by weapons, he certainly can be. Its breath is hot on his face, reeking of old kills, of blood and bone and the darkness of its cave. Its weight is enormous, pressing down on him, trying to pin him, trying to position those terrible jaws for a killing bite. But Heracles has advantages too. His hands, stronger than any mortal's, can grip where others would slip. His knowledge of wrestling, learned from the finest teachers in Greece, gives him leverage where the lion has only instinct. And most importantly, he can think, can plan, can adapt in ways the lion, for all its magnificence, cannot. The battle moves back toward the cave, a rolling, thrashing mass of golden fur and human determination. Heracles manages to get behind the lion, his arms wrapping around its throat in a hold that would crush a normal creature's windpipe in seconds. But this is no normal creature, and its neck is thick with muscle, protected by that impervious hide. Still, he squeezes, putting all his divine strength into this one effort, feeling something begin to give, not the hide, but something beneath it, something internal, something vital. The lion thrashes wildly, its claws scrabbling against stone, its roars becoming something else, something desperate. It tries to roll, to shake him off, to reach him with those claws. But Heracles holds on with a determination born of necessity. This is not just about completing a labor. This is about proving something fundamental, that will can overcome nature, that mind can defeat matter, that even the invulnerable have vulnerabilities if one knows where to look. Slowly, terribly, the lion's struggles weaken. Its roars become gasps. Its powerful limbs begin to twitch rather than strike. And finally, with a last shudder that seems to run through the very earth itself, the Nemean lion dies, not from any wound that can be seen, but from the simple inability to draw breath, the most basic vulnerability of all living things. Heracles releases his hold and steps back, breathing hard, blood running from the wounds on his back, looking down at this magnificent creature that terror has become in death. There is no triumph in his expression, only a kind of weary respect and understanding that something unique has passed from the world, something that, for all its terror, will never come again. But the labor is not complete. Theus demanded proof, demanded the lion's pelt as evidence of its defeat. And here, Heracles faces a problem that would be almost comical if it weren't so frustrating. The hide that no weapon could pierce in life remains impervious in death. His broken club cannot cut it. Stones shatter against it. Even sharp flints, carefully knapped, make no impression on that golden surface. It is the lion itself that provides the solution. Its own claws, Heracles realizes, are part of the same divine invulnerability. What cannot be cut from without might yield to its own nature. Using one of the lion's claws like a knife, he carefully, laboriously begins to skin the great beast, a process that takes hours, that requires patience he didn't know he possessed, that teaches him something about the relationship between power and precision, between strength and subtlety. As the pelt finally comes free, Heracles holds it up to the moonlight that now fills the valley. It is surprisingly light for its size, and warm, as if it still holds some essence of the life that once filled it. He wraps it around his shoulders and immediately feels its power. Not just the physical protection it offers, though that is considerable, but something else, something harder to define. A new identity settling over him like destiny. When he walks back down the hills toward Nemea, wearing the lion's pelt with its head forming a hood over his own, the people who see him in the moonlight think at first that the lion has returned. Then they recognize the human form within the golden skin and understand that something new has been born, neither fully man nor fully monster, but something in between, something necessary for the tasks that lie ahead. This is what the lion's pelt means, this new beginning that is also a kind of ending. Heracles, the man, the husband, the father, is gone, destroyed in the madness that began this journey. In his place stands something else, someone else, a figure wrapped in proof of the impossible, marked forever as one who exists between worlds. The pelt will become his signature, his identity, his constant reminder that transformation often requires us to wear the skin of what we've overcome, to carry our conquered fears as protection against future terrors. The road from Nemea to Elis is long and winding, following river valleys where poplars grow tall and straight, their leaves chattering secrets to anyone who knows how to listen. Heracles walks this road in his new skin, the lion's pelt now worn smooth against his shoulders, its weight familiar as his own shadow. People in the villages he passes through step aside, some in fear, some in awe, all recognizing that this is no ordinary traveler, but something else. Someone marked by destiny or cursed by it, depending on how one chooses to see such things. The second labor that Eurystheus has commanded seems, at first, designed purely to humiliate. Clean the Augean stables in a single day. The stables of King Augeas, where 3,000 cattle have lived for 30 years without the waste ever being cleared. Mountains of manure, rivers of filth, an accumulation so vast that it has become a landmark in its own right, visible from miles away. Its stench carried on every wind. This is meant to break him, Heracles understands, not his body. Eurystheus has already seen that his body cannot be broken by conventional means. This is meant to break his spirit, to reduce the hero who killed the Nemean Lion to a simple stable boy, knee-deep in animal waste, reminded that for all his divine heritage, he is still subject to the will of a lesser man, still bound by his oath to serve, still capable of being degraded. But as Heracles approaches Elis, following the river Peneus as it winds through rich farmland, he begins to see something else in this labor, something Eurystheus probably never considered. Water moves always toward its level, always finds its way, always accomplishes through persistence what force alone cannot achieve. The river beside him has carved a valley through solid rock, not through violence, but through patience, not through strength, but through consistency, through the simple refusal to be stopped. King Augeas receives him with barely concealed amusement. He is a rich man, made richer still by his vast herds, and he has the comfortable confidence of one who has never had to prove himself in any arena that matters. His cattle are sacred to Helios, the sun god, and this divine connection has brought him wealth beyond measure, though it has also, perhaps, made him careless about the physical world, too focused on the celestial to notice the terrestrial corruption literally piling up in his backyard. So, Augeas says, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension that only the very wealthy can properly achieve. The great Heracles has come to shovel dung. How the mighty have fallen! Tell me, hero, does your famous strength extend to your nose? Because you'll need it to survive the smell. Heracles says nothing at first, simply walks to where the stables sprawl across the landscape like a small city of filth. The structure itself is sound enough. Massive wooden beams supporting a roof that stretches for hundreds of yards. But the floor, what should be the floor, is buried under decades of accumulation. The cattle, magnificent beasts with hides that gleam like polished bronze, pick their way through passages they've worn in the waste. Their own beauty a strange contrast to the squalor they inhabit. The smell is indeed overwhelming, not just of manure, but of time, of neglect, of problems allowed to compound until they become almost insurmountable. Heracles has fought monsters, has wrestled with death itself. But this is different. This is the monster of accumulated indifference, the beast of problems deferred, the hydra of consequences that multiply when ignored. For a long moment, he stands at the edge of this sea of filth. And in that moment, he feels the weight of Eurystheus's mockery, feels the desire to simply walk away, to break his oath, and accept whatever consequences follow. What glory is there in this? What songs will be sung about the hero who cleaned stables? What lessons can be learned from shoveling waste? Then he looks at the river, the faithful Peneus running clear and strong nearby. And then at another river, the Alpheus, which bounds the property on the other side. Two rivers, two forces of nature, each capable of moving mountains given time. But he doesn't have time. He has one day, sunrise to sunset, to accomplish what 30 years of normal labor couldn't achieve. This is when Heracles understands that the labor isn't about the filth at all. It's about transformation, about redirection, about using existing forces in new ways. It's about seeing solutions where others see only problems, about understanding that sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when not to use strength at all. He begins before dawn, not with shovel or cart, but with his hands and a simple wooden stake, marking the path he envisions. The cattle watch him with their large, liquid eyes, perhaps sensing that change is coming to their world of accumulated neglect. Augeas watches too, from the comfort of his palace, amused by what he assumes is futile preparation for an impossible task. But Heracles is not preparing to clean in any conventional sense. He is preparing to redirect, to channel, to transform the very landscape itself. Using his incredible strength, he begins to dig, not in the stables, but beyond them, carving channels in the earth with his bare hands. Trenches that grow deeper and wider as the sun climbs toward its zenith. The watching crowd, for a crowd has gathered, drawn by the spectacle of the great hero attempting the impossible, murmurs in confusion. What is he doing? Why is he digging there, away from the stables? Has the smell driven him mad? Has he given up already and decided to dig his own grave rather than face the humiliation of failure? But Heracles continues, methodical and patient, his powerful hands moving earth like water, creating a network of channels that begin to make sense only when viewed from the hillside above. He is creating a new path for the rivers, a temporary diversion that will send their combined waters through the stables like a liquid army, using the force that has carved valleys from stone to scour away decades of accumulation in hours. The sun reaches its peak. Sweat pours from Heracles' body, mixing with the dirt until he is almost unrecognizable. A figure of earth and effort, of pure will made manifest. The channels are complete, but the hardest part remains. He must breach the riverbanks, must convince these ancient waters to leave their established paths and follow the new ones he has created. At the Peneus, he builds a temporary dam of stones and logs, forcing the water to rise to seek new outlets. The river resists at first, trying to flow around his obstacles, patient as always, persistent as always. But Heracles is persistent too, and slowly, gradually, the water begins to follow the channels he has carved. A trickle at first, then a stream, then a torrent. The Alpheus requires a different approach. This river is stronger, faster, more set in its ways. Here, Heracles must use not just redirection, but division, splitting the river's flow, sending part of it toward his channels, while allowing the rest to continue on its ancient course. It's a delicate balance, requiring constant adjustment, constant attention, constant adaptation to the water's will. And then, with a sound like thunder, the two rivers meet in his carved channels and rush toward the stables. The cattle, warned by some ancient instinct, have already moved to higher ground, watching from safety as the waters surge through their former home. The accumulated waste of 30 years meets the accumulated power of centuries, and there is no contest. The water scours everything in its path, not violently, not destructively, but thoroughly, completely, with the kind of cleansing that only flowing water can provide. Years of compacted filth dissolve and are carried away. The wooden floors of the stables, not seen for decades, emerge clean and sound. The very air seems to lighten as the source of the stench is washed away, carried downstream to become fertilizer for distant fields. Transformation, even in disposal. Augeas arrives as the sun begins its descent, his amusement replaced by amazement, and then, quickly, by calculation. He sees his stables not just cleaned, but transformed, improved beyond what they were even when new. He sees the channels Heracles has carved, which could be maintained, could be used to keep the stables clean forever with minimal effort. He sees possibilities he never imagined. Remarkable, he says. But there's something in his voice, a shift from condescension to avarice. Simply remarkable. Tell me, Heracles, would you consider staying? I could use a man of your ingenuity. I would pay well, very well indeed. But Heracles is already redirecting the rivers back to their original courses, filling in the channels, restoring the landscape to its natural state. This transformation was meant to last only a day, to prove a point, to complete a labor. Making it permanent is not his responsibility, not his choice to make. Your stables are clean, he says simply. The labor is complete. Augeas tries to argue, tries to claim that because Heracles used the rivers instead of cleaning by hand, the labor doesn't count, shouldn't count. But the crowd that has gathered, has witnessed, knows better. They have seen something extraordinary, something that transcends the simple act of cleaning. They have seen problems solved through intelligence rather than force, seen the power of redirection, seen how even the mightiest strength must sometimes yield to wisdom. As Heracles walks away, the lion pelt now washed clean by the same waters that cleaned the stables, he carries with him a new understanding. The first labor taught him about transformation through conflict, about wearing the skin of what we overcome. This second labor has taught him about transformation through redirection, about using existing forces rather than opposing them, about the power of working with nature rather than against it. The rivers continue their eternal journey to the sea, untroubled by their brief diversion, carrying within their waters the dissolved remnants of years of stagnation. They will deposit this rich sediment in fields downstream where it will feed crops, nurture growth, continue the endless cycle of transformation that is the true nature of existence. Nothing is truly waste. Heracles understands now. Everything is simply material awaiting its next transformation. Behind him, the cattle return to their cleaned stables, their bronze hides glowing in the setting sun. Augeas stands among them, already calculating how long it will take for the filth to accumulate again, already returning to his comfortable negligence. But some of the younger farmhands who witnessed what happened today will remember. They will remember that problems which seem insurmountable can sometimes be solved by changing the direction of our approach, by redirecting rather than confronting, by using the forces available to us in new and unexpected ways. This is what it means to cleanse rivers and cool tempers, not through suppression or denial, but through redirection, through finding new channels for old energies, through understanding that even the most torrential forces can be guided if we have the wisdom to work with them rather than against them. The waters that cleaned the stables are the same waters that could have destroyed them if approached with force rather than intelligence. The difference lies not in the water, but in the wisdom of the one who redirects it. The mountain path winds upward through forests of black pine and wild oak, where shadows pool like dark honey between the roots, and the air carries the scent of resin and old earth. Heracles climbs steadily, his breath misting in the cooler air of altitude. The lion pelt across his shoulders, a golden contrast to the green darkness surrounding him. He is heading to Cerynea, pursuing a creature that most believe to be uncatchable, the sacred hind of Artemis, with its golden antlers and bronze hooves, swift as thought itself. This third labor marks a change, a shift in the nature of what Eurystheus demands. The lion was about confrontation. The stables were about transformation. But the hind is about something else entirely. It cannot be killed, for it belongs to Artemis, goddess of the hunt, and to kill it would bring divine wrath beyond imagining. It cannot be wounded for the same reason. It must be captured alive, unharmed, and brought back to Mycenae. An impossibility wrapped in paradox, delivered with Eurystheus's usual smirk of anticipated failure. But Heracles has begun to understand something about these labors that Eurystheus does not, perhaps cannot. They are not random torments designed to break him. They are teachings, each one building on the last, each one preparing him for the next, each one adding another layer to his understanding of what it means to be both human and divine, to exist in the space between mortal limitation and immortal possibility. The forest grows denser as he climbs, the trees older, their trunks massive and gnarled with centuries of growth. This is ancient woodland, the kind of place where the boundaries between the physical and the spiritual grow thin, where a man might glimpse things normally hidden, where the gods still walk when the moon is dark and the wind is still. Every shadow could hide the hind. Every distant sound could be its bronze hooves on stone. Every flash of light through the leaves could be sunlight catching on golden antlers. For days, Heracles searches without success. He finds tracks, delicate impressions in soft earth that seem to shimmer with their own light. He finds places where the hind has browsed, where young shoots have been neatly nipped, where spring water has been disturbed by drinking. But the creature itself remains invisible, always one step ahead, always just beyond reach, as if it exists in a slightly different dimension of time, experiencing moments before or after he does. never quite when. This is when Heracles realizes that hunting, in its conventional sense, will never succeed here. The hind is not just swift, it is swiftness itself, the very concept of flight made manifest. To pursue it with physical speed alone would be like trying to catch the wind by running faster. A different approach is needed, one that acknowledges the sacred nature of the quarry, that respects the divine ownership it represents, that understands the capture itself must be a kind of worship. He begins to observe instead of pursue. He maps the hind's territory, learning its preferences, its patterns, the places it returns to again and again. There is a glade where it comes to dance in the moonlight, its bronze hooves striking sparks from the stones. There is a pool, fed by a spring that bubbles up from deep earth where it drinks at dawn. There is a grove of ancient oaks where it rests during the heat of midday, invisible among the dappled shadows. Slowly, patiently, Heracles begins to understand the rhythm of the hind's existence. It is not random but ritualistic, following patterns as old as the forest itself, patterns that honor the goddess it serves, patterns that maintain the balance between the wild and the divine. To capture such a creature, he realizes he must enter into its rhythm, must become part of its pattern, must earn the right to approach through patience rather than force. For a full year, Heracles follows the hind. Through winter's bitter cold, when the forest sleeps under blankets of snow, and the hind's tracks are the only signs of life in the white silence. Through spring's awakening, when the forest explodes with green and the hind dances among the wildflowers. Through summer's abundance, when the forest provides everything any creature could need, and the hind grows fat and glossy with good feeding. Through autumn's transformation, when the forest burns with color and the hind's golden antlers seem to mirror the dying leaves, a year of following, of learning, of becoming so familiar with the hind's patterns that he can predict where it will be at any given moment. But more than that, a year of transformation for Heracles himself. The constant pursuit, never rushing, never forcing, teaches him a patience he has never known. The need to move silently through the forest teaches him a grace his massive frame has never possessed. The requirement to observe rather than act teaches him a quality of attention that transforms his understanding of the world around him. By the end of that year, something strange has happened. The hind no longer flees at his approach. It watches him from a distance, those liquid eyes holding an intelligence that seems almost human, almost divine. They have become familiar to each other, hunter and hunted, locked in a dance that neither truly wants to end. Heracles could probably capture it now, could use the trust that has developed to get close enough to seize it. But he doesn't. Not yet. There is more to learn here, more to understand. He begins to dream of the hind. In these dreams, it speaks to him in a voice like wind through leaves, telling him stories of the forest, of the time before humans, when the world was young and the gods walked openly among their creations. It tells him of Artemis, the goddess who owns it, who saved it from hunters when it was young, who transformed it from mortal deer to divine servant, who gave it golden antlers as a sign of its sacred nature. "You cannot capture me," the dream hind says, "any more than you can capture moonlight or starfire or the scent of spring rain. I am not a thing to be possessed, but a mystery to be experienced. The only cage that could hold me is understanding. The only chain that could bind me is respect." When Heracles wakes from these dreams, he finds himself changed. The brutal strength that has defined him for so long has not diminished, but it has been tempered by something else, something subtler, something that understands power not as domination, but as relationship, not as taking, but as receiving what is freely given. The moment of capture, when it finally comes, is almost anticlimactic. It happens at the spring pool at dawn, with mist rising from the water and the first birds beginning their morning songs. The hind is drinking, its golden antlers reflecting in the still water, creating a double image, real and reflection, earth and water, substance and shadow. Heracles approaches slowly, openly, making no attempt at stealth. The hind raises its head, watches him come, and does not flee. They stand there, hero and sacred animal, regarding each other across a distance that is both physical and metaphysical, both real and symbolic. "I must take you to Mycenae," Heracles says, speaking aloud for the first time in months, his voice rough with disuse. "It is my labor, my obligation, my path to redemption. But I promise you this, no harm will come to you. You will be returned to this forest, to your goddess, to your patterns and your purpose. This is just a moment in your eternal existence, a brief detour in your endless dance." The hind takes a step forward, then another, and another, until it stands directly before him, close enough to touch, close enough to capture, close enough to complete the labor that has consumed a year of his life. But Heracles doesn't immediately reach out. Instead, he kneels, bringing himself down to the hind's level, showing respect, showing submission to something greater than physical power. Only then does he place his hands gently on the hind's neck, feeling the warmth of divine life pulsing beneath his fingers. The hind doesn't struggle, doesn't resist. It has chosen to be captured, understanding perhaps that this too is part of its service to Artemis, part of the great pattern that connects all things. The journey back to Mycenae takes weeks, but it is unlike any journey Heracles has made before. He walks beside the hind rather than driving it before him. He ensures it has the finest grazing, the clearest water, the safest resting places. Other travelers they meet on the road stop in amazement, not at the sight of Heracles. His fame has spread far by now, but at the sight of the sacred hind walking calmly beside him, its golden antlers catching the light like a crown, its bronze hooves ringing on the stone roads like bells. At Mycenae, Eurystheus barely glances at the hind, already planning the next impossible task, already certain that eventually one of these labors will break the hero he so despises. He waves dismissively, telling Heracles to get rid of it, not understanding the magnitude of what has been accomplished, not seeing the transformation that has taken place. Heracles returns the hind to its forest, to its spring, to its patterns. As he releases it, the creature pauses, turns back to look at him one last time. In that look is something that might be gratitude, might be recognition, might be blessing. Then it bounds away, disappearing into the green shadows, returning to its eternal dance, leaving Heracles standing alone but not unchanged. This is what it means to understand labors as teachings, not tests. Each task Eurystheus sets is meant to humiliate, to break, to destroy. But each task, approached with wisdom rather than mere strength, becomes an opportunity for growth, for learning, for transformation. The lion taught the necessity of wearing our victories. The stables taught the power of redirection. And the hind has taught the deepest lesson yet, that true strength lies not in taking, but in patience, not in capturing, but in being trusted enough that capture becomes cooperation. As Heracles makes his way back toward whatever labor awaits him next, he carries these teachings like invisible armor, each one protecting him not from physical harm, but from the spiritual destruction that Eurystheus intends. He is becoming something new with each task, something that transcends both his divine heritage and his mortal form. He is becoming wisdom embodied, patience personified, understanding made flesh. The forest watches him go, every tree a witness, every shadow a memory, every bird song a celebration of lessons learned and teachings received. The hind, somewhere in the green depths, continues its eternal dance, its brief captivity already becoming legend, already transforming from event to story to myth to truth that transcends mere fact. Night falls over the Peloponnese like a vast purple cloth sewn with diamonds. Each star a point of light that has traveled years or centuries to reach this moment, this place, these eyes that look upward, seeking meaning in the arrangement of distant fires. Heracles lies on a hillside, the lion pelt beneath him, still warm with the day's heat, looking up at the patterns that wheel eternally overhead, seeing in them not just points of light, but stories, memories, promises, written in the fundamental architecture of the cosmos. There is Leo, the lion, his first labor transformed into celestial permanence. Those stars that form its mane once formed the actual mane he grabbed in desperate combat. That curve of stars that marks its back once rippled with muscle beneath his grip. The star that burns at its heart, Regulus, the little king, marks the spot where he felt the last heartbeat of that magnificent, terrible creature before it became legend, before it became the cloak he wears, before it became this constellation that will outlive empires, outlive languages, outlive even the memory of why it bears this shape. The ancient Greeks understood something profound about the relationship between earth and sky, between human action and cosmic meaning. They knew that stories, to truly survive, must be written in media more permanent than papyrus or stone. They must be inscribed in the very fabric of night itself, placed among the stars, where each generation can find them anew, can read them according to their own needs, their own understanding, their own place in the great unfolding pattern of existence. But the constellations are not static, though they seem so to our brief lives. They too are in motion, engaged in a dance so slow that entire civilizations rise and fall between the steps. Precession, the astronomers call it, the gradual wobble of Earth's axis that causes the stars to shift their positions over thousands of years. The lion that Heracles sees is not quite the lion that the ancient Babylonians saw, nor is it the lion that humans will see 3,000 years hence. Yet it remains the lion, eternal and temporary simultaneously, fixed and fluid, permanent and transient. This is the paradox of the constellations, and perhaps the deepest teaching they offer. They are both map and territory, both symbol and reality, both human projection and cosmic truth. When we look at Leo, are we seeing an actual lion placed in the heavens by divine will? Or are we seeing a pattern of unrelated stars that human minds have connected with imaginary lines, creating meaning where none exists? The answer Heracles understands as he lies on this hillside is both and neither. The stars are real. The pattern is real. The lion is real. All existing at different levels of reality that intersect in the human act of observation, interpretation, remembrance. Consider Draco, the dragon that winds between the bears, guardian of the golden apples, that will figure in Heracles' 11th labor, though he doesn't know this yet. That serpentine form traced in stars was once, they say, the dragon led on, placed in the heavens by Hera after Heracles slew it. But Ladon is also still alive in the garden of the Hesperides, still guarding those golden apples, still waiting for the hero who will one day come to claim them. How can it be both dead in the heavens and alive on earth? Because mythological time doesn't follow the same rules as historical time. In mythological time, everything is always happening, has always happened, will always happen. The dragon dies eternally and lives eternally. And both states are equally true. The Hydra stretches across the southern sky, the longest constellation, its many heads reduced to a single sinuous line of stars. Heracles has not yet faced the actual Hydra, that many-headed monster whose heads multiply when severed, but he has dreamed of it. And in those dreams, he has seen how its celestial counterpart mirrors its earthly nature. The constellation Hydra cannot be seen all at once from any single place on earth. As one part rises, another sets, as if its heads truly do multiply beyond our ability to perceive them all simultaneously. Near Hydra crouches Cancer, the crab, a small and seemingly insignificant constellation that nonetheless earned its place in the heavens. The story says that while Heracles fought the Hydra, Hera sent a crab to distract him, to nip at his heels, to divide his attention. The crab was crushed almost casually, a minor annoyance in a major battle. Yet there it is in the sky, immortalized, its small act of courage or futility, depending on how one sees it, deemed worthy of eternal remembrance. This teaches something profound about the nature of cosmic justice, about how even the smallest acts in the great drama of existence deserve recognition, deserve remembrance, deserve their place in the eternal story. The constellation Sagittarius, the archer, half man and half horse, is often associated with Chiron, the centaur who trained Heracles in his youth, who taught him that strength without wisdom is mere brutality, that power without compassion is tyranny. Chiron, accidentally wounded by one of Heracles' poisoned arrows, will choose to surrender his immortality rather than live in eternal agony. He will be placed among the stars as Sagittarius, forever drawing his bow, forever about to release an arrow that never flies, forever frozen in the moment of perfect potential. This is what constellations truly are, moments of perfect potential frozen in the night sky. Stories stopped at their most meaningful instant and held there for eternity. They are not endings, but eternal middles, not conclusions, but perpetual processes, not answers, but questions that each generation must ask anew. As the night deepens and the stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, Heracles contemplates the relationship between his earthly labors and their celestial reflections. Each task he completes seems to resonate with something in the heavens, as if the universe itself is taking note, making room among the stars for these new stories, these new meanings, these new ways of understanding the relationship between human struggle and cosmic order. The constellation Hercules, which future generations will name after him, is already there in the sky, though it bears a different name now. Engonasin, the kneeler, a figure on one knee, struggling with some eternal task. He can see it above him, its brightest star marking the head of a figure that seems to be wrestling with something invisible, eternal, essential. Is he seeing his own future written in stars? Or is his future being shaped to match what was always written there? The question has no answer, or rather, it has every answer, all equally true, all equally partial. Botes, the herdsman, drives the constellation of the Great Bear around the pole, eternally pursuing, never catching, engaged in a hunt that defines both hunter and hunted. This too speaks to Heracles' experience, to the way his labors have become not just tasks to complete, but relationships to enter, dances to perform, patterns to fulfill. He is not just killing monsters or capturing creatures. He is participating in something larger, something that connects the personal to the universal, the momentary to the eternal, the human to the divine. The Pleiades rise, those seven sisters transformed into stars to escape unwanted pursuit, their light traveling over 400 years to reach his eyes. When that light began its journey, the stories of Heracles had not yet been born. By the time the light he sees them by returns to them, if it ever could, his stories will be older than ancient, worn smooth by countless retellings, reduced to their essential elements like stones in a river, like stars in the sky, like truths that no longer need their original contexts to convey their meanings. This is the deepest teaching of the constellations, that stories, to survive, must lose their specificity and gain universality. The lion in the sky is no longer just the Nemean lion, but all lions, all challenges that seem invincible until faced with courage. The Hydra is no longer just a specific monster, but all problems that multiply when attacked directly. The crab is no longer just Hera's servant, but all small acts of courage in the face of overwhelming odds. As dawn approaches, painting the eastern sky with rose and gold, the stars begin to fade, not because they cease to shine, but because our local star, the sun, overwhelms them with its proximity. But Heracles knows they are still there, will always be there, continuing their eternal dance, whether we can see them or not. The stories written in the stars don't need human eyes to validate them. They exist independently of our observation, yet they exist for our observation, created by the meaning-making faculty that makes us human, that allows us to see heroes and monsters, gods and mortals, lessons and warnings in what might otherwise be only burning gas and empty space. Rising from his hillside bed, Heracles prepares to continue his journey toward the next labor, carrying with him this new understanding of how heaven and earth mirror each other, how every earthly action has celestial consequences, how the stories we enact below are simultaneously being written above. He is both author and character, both teller and tale, both the hand that writes and the words being written across the infinite parchment of night. The constellations wheel on, indifferent and intimate, distant and immediate, marking time in measures that dwarf human comprehension, while also providing the very framework within which human comprehension occurs. They are memory made manifest, story made permanent, meaning made visible. They are proof that what we do matters enough to be remembered, that how we do it matters enough to be celebrated, that why we do it matters enough to be written in lights that will outlast the earth itself. This is what it means to have our stories pinned to stars, not just to be remembered, but to become part of the fundamental architecture of meaning, part of the cosmic language through which the universe tells itself what it is, what it has been, what it might become. Every labor Heracles completes adds another word to this vocabulary, another story to this anthology, another star to this vast constellation of human meaning-making in the face of infinite mystery. The road winds downward now, away from the stark peaks where he captured the Erymanthian boar, through forests of pine and fir that gradually give way to gentler slopes clothed in olive groves and vineyards. Heracles walks slowly, his body bearing the accumulated weight of labors completed and labors yet to come. The lion pelt, once golden and pristine, now shows signs of wear, tears mended with rough stitching, stains that won't wash clean, places worn thin by constant use. It has become less a trophy and more a second skin, bearing its own scars, its own history, its own gradual transformation from symbol to reality. In a valley where two rivers meet, there is a small town whose name history will forget, but whose kindness Heracles will remember forever. He arrives at dusk, when the light turns everything to honey and amber, when shadows grow long and soft, when the world seems to pause between day and night, between activity and rest, between being and becoming. He is tired, more tired than his divine strength should allow. Tired in ways that have nothing to do with physical exertion and everything to do with the weight of carrying redemption like a stone in his chest. The townspeople see him coming from a distance. This massive figure wrapped in a lion's skin, carrying a club that could fell an oak, marked by fame and tragedy in equal measure. In other places, they might flee, might bar their doors, might offer tribute to make him pass quickly by. But here, in this forgotten valley, they do something unexpected. They welcome him. An old woman, bent nearly double with age, is the first to approach. She carries a cup of water, spring water, cold and clear, and offers it to him with hands that tremble not from fear, but from the simple infirmity of having lived too many years. "You look thirsty, young man," she says, and there is something in her voice, some quality of maternal concern that transcends the fact that he could crush her with a thought, that makes him take the cup, drink deeply, feel the water not just quenching physical thirst, but touching something deeper, something parched in ways he hadn't recognized. "Come," she says, taking his hand with a grip surprisingly firm for one so frail. "There's a place for you here." The place turns out to be not a palace or a temple, not a hero's welcome with fanfare and ceremony, but a simple house with a courtyard where chickens peck at scattered grain and a fig tree provides shade. There is a bench worn smooth by generations of sitting, a well with a rope polished by countless hands, a cooking fire that has burned in the same place for generations, spot for so long that the stones around it have been transformed, made sacred by daily use. The old woman's name is Pythia, though she is not the oracle, not blessed with divine sight, not anything more than what she appears. A widow who has outlived her children, who has seen empires rise and fall, who has learned that kindness is not a luxury, but a necessity, not weakness, but the deepest strength humans possess. "Sit," she says, and Heracles sits, his massive frame making the bench creak but hold. "Rest," she says, and he realizes he cannot remember the last time someone gave him permission to rest. The last time rest was even a possibility in his world of endless labors, endless proving, endless atonement for a crime he committed in madness, not malice. She brings him food, not a feast, not the elaborate hospitality that kings provide to prove their wealth, but simple food, honest food. Bread still warm from the oven, cheese made that morning, olives cured in brine and herbs, figs so ripe they split at the touch, honey that tastes of the wild flowers that carpet the hillsides in spring. Each bite is a reminder that life continues despite tragedy, that simple pleasures persist despite cosmic dramas, that somewhere, always, bread is rising, cheese is aging, bees are making honey, and the world goes on. As he eats, others from the town begin to arrive, not to gawk, not to petition for favors, not to challenge or worship or fear, but simply to be present, to share the evening, to offer what they have. A shepherd brings wine, rough and local but honest. A potter brings a bowl, slightly lopsided but glazed with colors that catch the firelight like captured sunset. A weaver brings a blanket, simple wool but soft, warm, speaking of care in every thread. They don't ask about his labors. They don't mention his tragedy. They don't treat him as Heracles the hero, or Heracles the killer, or Heracles the divine bastard, or any of the other identities that have been thrust upon him. They treat him simply as a tired traveler in need of rest. And in doing so, they give him something all his divine strength cannot provide. The gift of being merely human, if only for one evening. As night deepens, stories begin to flow, but not his stories. The shepherd tells of a wolf that learned to live peacefully among the sheep, eating only what died naturally, protecting the flock from other predators, becoming something neither wild nor tame, but something new, something unprecedented. The potter speaks of clay that refused to hold its shape, that collapsed again and again until she learned to work with its nature rather than against it, creating vessels that seemed to flow like frozen water, beautiful in their imperfection. The weaver tells of a thread that wouldn't match any others, that stood out garish and wrong in every pattern she tried, until she wove it alone and discovered it made a cloth that seemed to shimmer with its own light, that couldn't be categorized or replicated, that became her masterpiece, not despite its difference, but because of it. These are small stories, local stories, human stories. But Heracles hears in them echoes of his own journey. The wolf that transcends its nature, the clay that teaches patience, the thread that finds beauty in isolation. These are his stories too, told in a different key, scaled to human size, made manageable and meaningful in ways his cosmic drama sometimes obscures. When the fire burns low and the others begin to drift away to their homes, Pythia remains. She looks at him with eyes that have seen too much to be surprised by anything, even a half-god wrestling with his humanity in her courtyard. Atonement, she says, as if tasting the word, testing its weight. Such a heavy word for what is really just learning to live with ourselves. You carry your guilt like Atlas carries the sky, as if the weight itself is the punishment, the payment, the price. But what if it's not? What if the weight is just weight, and the real atonement is learning to set it down, even if just for a moment, even if just to pick it up again? Heracles wants to explain that it's not that simple, that divine justice doesn't work that way, that Hera's hatred and Zeus's indifference and the cosmic balance of things requires his suffering to continue, must continue, will always continue. But the words don't come. Instead, he finds himself crying, great tears that he hasn't shed since that terrible morning, when he woke from madness to find his world destroyed. Pythia doesn't comfort him, doesn't tell him it will be all right, doesn't minimize his pain. She simply sits with him, present in his grief, allowing it to be what it is without trying to fix or change or redirect it. This is kindness in its purest form, not the attempt to solve another's problems, but the willingness to be present with them in their unsolvability. Not the offer of false hope, but the gift of genuine companionship. Not the promise that pain will end, but the reminder that pain shared is pain that doesn't isolate, doesn't separate, doesn't exile us from the human community. The night wears on, and eventually, Heracles sleeps. Not the restless sleep of the guilty, not the vigilant sleep of the threatened, but deep sleep, dreamless sleep, the sleep of someone who has been given permission to stop, if only temporarily, the endless work of earning forgiveness that may never come. He wakes before dawn to find Pythia already up, tending her fire, preparing simple food for the journey she knows he must continue. She has mended the worst tears in his lion pelt, not expertly, but carefully, with stitches that will hold. She has filled a water skin with spring water, packed bread and cheese in a cloth, prepared for his departure without trying to prevent it. "This isn't rest," she says as he prepares to leave. "This is just a pause, a breath between labors. Real rest, the kind that restores not just the body, but the soul. That's something you're still earning, still learning, still approaching. But remember this, it exists. Somewhere, always, there is a place where you can stop, where you can be human, where kindness doesn't require deserving." Heracles wants to thank her, but thanks seem insufficient. He wants to repay her, but she needs nothing he can provide. He wants to stay, but knows he cannot. So he simply nods, shoulders his club, adjusts his mended lion pelt, and continues on his way, carrying with him something new. Not hope exactly, but the memory of hope, the possibility of hope, the promise that somewhere, in some forgotten valley, kindness waits without conditions. Rest exists without prerequisites, and being human is enough. As he climbs out of the valley, he looks back once to see smoke rising from Pythia's fire, a thin line connecting earth to sky. ephemeral and eternal, insignificant and essential. This too is a kind of constellation, he realizes. These points of human kindness scattered across the dark landscape of existence, forming patterns of meaning that guide us through our labors, our guilt, our long journey toward whatever redemption awaits at the end of all our striving. The sun rises, painting the world in colors that have no names, only feelings. Somewhere ahead waits his next labor, his next test, his next teaching disguised as torment. But for now, for this moment between moments, he carries with him the gift of having been seen not as a hero or a monster, but simply as someone in need of rest, someone deserving of kindness, not because of what he's done or might do, but simply because he exists, because he suffers, because he continues despite everything to put one foot in front of the other on this long road toward meaning. The road stretches endlessly ahead, a ribbon of dust and stone winding through landscapes that shift like dreams. Now forest, now desert, now meadow, now mountain. Heracles has been walking for so long that his footsteps have worn grooves in his own soul. Paths of repetition that lead always forward, always toward the next labor, the next test, the next opportunity to prove something that becomes less clear with each passing day. But along these dusty roads, between the great moments of triumph and tragedy that will become legend, something else happens, something quieter, something that the storytellers will mostly forget, but which shapes him as surely as any monster conquered or task completed. He meets helpers, not heroes, not gods, not magical beings with supernatural powers. Just people, ordinary people, who appear at precisely the moment they are needed, who offer precisely the assistance required, who demonstrate through small acts that no one truly walks alone, no matter how solitary their journey appears. Consider the boy with the water jar, met at a crossroads where three paths diverge, and Heracles stands uncertain which leads to his next destination. The boy cannot be more than 10, skinny as a reed, with eyes too large for his face and feet too large for his body. That awkward stage of growth where nothing quite fits together properly. He carries a jar of water on his shoulder, water from some distant well, water for his family's evening meal perhaps, water that represents significant effort for such small shoulders. "You look lost," the boy says, setting down his jar with obvious relief, wiping sweat from his forehead with a dirty hand that leaves streaks of mud like war paint. "Not lost," Heracles replies, though in truth he is, if not geographically then spiritually, eternally wandering between who he was and who he is becoming, simply uncertain which road leads to Thrace. The boy considers this with the seriousness that children bring to adult problems. as if the fate of the world hangs on his answer, which in some small way it does. Every choice, every direction, every piece of guidance shapes the path that leads to destiny or away from it. That way, the boy points to the leftmost path, leads to Thrace eventually, but it goes through the mountains where the storms gather, where the paths are treacherous, where travelers sometimes disappear and are never seen again. That way, he indicates the middle path, also leads to Thrace, but it follows the valley where the king's soldiers patrol, where they ask questions, demand tolls, sometimes conscript strong men for their armies. And the third path, Heracles asks, though the boy hasn't mentioned it. The third path doesn't lead to Thrace at all. It goes to my village, where there's nothing special, nothing important, nothing worthy of a hero's attention. The boy pauses, then adds with the honesty that only children possess. But my grandmother says sometimes the longest way around is the shortest way through. She says the path that seems wrong is sometimes the only one that's right. She says a lot of things that don't make sense until later. Heracles looks at the boy more carefully, seeing in him something familiar, something that echoes his own young self before divine parentage and tragic destiny shaped him into what he has become. The boy is nobody special, will probably live and die within a few miles of where he was born, will never have songs sung about him or stars named after him. Yet here he stands at this crossroads, offering wisdom disguised as childish rambling, providing guidance that comes not from knowledge, but from innocence, from the clarity that exists before life teaches us to doubt what we know. Your grandmother sounds wise, Heracles says. She's very old, the boy replies, as if age and wisdom are synonymous, which perhaps they are. Perhaps they must be, if life is to have meaning beyond mere duration. She remembers when the gods walked more openly among us, when heroes were more common, when the world was younger and stranger and more possible than it is now. Without really deciding to, Heracles finds himself following the boy down the third path, the one that doesn't lead to Thrace, the one that goes nowhere important. The boy chatters as they walk, stories pouring out of him like water from his jar. Stories about his village, his family, his small adventures that seem enormous to him and touchingly trivial to someone who has wrestled gods and monsters. Yet Heracles listens, really listens, finding in these small stories a kind of peace, a reminder that most of life happens not in the great moments, but in the small ones, not in the labors, but in the walking between them, not in the destinations, but in the dusty roads that lead there. The village, when they reach it, is indeed nothing special. A cluster of mud brick houses around a well, a few gardens scratching existence from reluctant soil, goats and chickens and dogs all living in the easy proximity of poverty. But the boy's grandmother is something else entirely. She is ancient, so old she seems to have collapsed in on herself like a star becoming something denser, more essential. Her eyes are milky with cataracts, yet she looks at Heracles as if she sees not just him, but through him, past him, into the distances he has traveled, and the distances yet to come. So, she says, her voice like wind through dry leaves, the killer of children seeks the path to redemption. The strong man discovers strength is not enough. The hero learns that heroism is mostly about continuing when continuation seems impossible. Heracles flinches at her words, at being seen so clearly, so completely. But there is no judgment in her voice, only observation, only the stating of facts that are neither good nor bad, but simply true. Sit, she says, and he sits. Listen, she says, and he listens. She tells him about the three sisters who live at the edge of Thrace, weavers who know the location of what he seeks. But she also tells him that they will not help him as he is, carrying his guilt like armor, wearing his tragedy like that lion's pelt he never removes. They will only help someone who comes to them naked of pretense, stripped of identity, reduced to essential humanity. But I cannot remove the pelt, Heracles protests. It has become part of me, my protection, my identity, my reminder of what I've accomplished and what I've lost. Cannot or will not? The grandmother asks, and in her blindness she sees more clearly than those with perfect vision. Every helper you meet on your journey offers you the same gift in different forms, the permission to be vulnerable, to be assisted, to be incomplete. But you, son of Zeus, you think accepting help diminishes your glory, reduces your heroism, admits a weakness that the world must never see. She reaches out with one gnarled hand and touches the lion pelt, her fingers finding the mended tears that Pythia stitched, the worn places that speak of constant use, the stains that mark moments of victory and defeat. This is not protection, she says. This is prison. You wear your first victory to hide from all future defeats. You carry your strength like a wall that keeps out not just harm, but help, not just enemies, but friends, not just pain, but healing. The boy watches this exchange with wide eyes, understanding perhaps for the first time that he has brought home not just a hero, but a lesson. Not just a stranger, but a story that will shape his understanding of what it means to be human. In a world that demands we be more or less than that. That night, Heracles sleeps in the grandmother's house, on a floor of packed earth, under a roof that leaks starlight through its gaps. And he dreams of helpers, all the ones he's met without recognizing them as such, all the ones who offered what he needed, but was too proud or too focused or too wounded to accept. There was the merchant who offered to share his meal by the roadside, whom Heracles refused because heroes don't take charity from ordinary people. There was the farmer who suggested an easier path through the mountains, whom Heracles ignored because surely his divine strength could overcome any obstacle. There was the child who wanted to show him where the clearest spring water flowed, whom Heracles dismissed because what could a child teach someone who has wrestled with gods? Each refusal he sees now in the clarity of dream was a small betrayal of his humanity, a tiny insistence that he was separate from, above, beyond the common flow of human interdependence. Each refusal made his journey harder, not in obvious ways, but in the accumulation of unnecessary difficulties, the multiplication of solitary struggles that could have been shared burdens. When morning comes, the grandmother is already awake, or perhaps she never sleeps, existing in some state between waking and dreaming, where truth becomes clearer than in either state alone. She gives him bread for his journey, but more importantly, she gives him words. Every person you meet on these dusty roads is a helper, whether they know it or not, whether you accept it or not. The angry man who curses you teaches patience. The thief who tries to rob you teaches vigilance. The kind woman who offers water teaches acceptance. The child who asks questions teaches humility. Every encounter is an opportunity to learn something necessary for the next stage of your journey. But how do I know, Heracles asks, which helpers to trust, which guidance to follow, which gifts to accept? You don't, she says simply. That's the point. Certainty is the enemy of growth. Doubt is the doorway to wisdom. The helper you reject might have been essential. The help you accept might lead you astray. But the willingness to be helped, that's what matters. The recognition that you cannot do this alone, that's the beginning of true strength. As Heracles leaves the village, the boy walks with him to the boundary, that invisible line where the familiar becomes foreign, where safety becomes adventure, where home becomes away. The boy gives him his water jar, the same one he was carrying when they met, now refilled with fresh water. For your journey, the boy says shyly. It's not much, but water is always needed, always helpful, always a gift, no matter how common it seems. Heracles accepts the jar with the gravity it deserves, understanding that this simple clay vessel, made by amateur hands, worth nothing in any marketplace, is more valuable than gold or jewels or divine artifacts. It is help freely offered, freely accepted, the establishment of connection between two humans on a dusty road, the recognition that every journey is shared, even when we walk alone. As he continues toward Thrace, Heracles finds himself noticing things he previously overlooked. The shepherd who points toward a shortcut without being asked, the old woman who warns of bandits ahead, the merchant who mentions that the bridge has washed out and suggests a ford. Each small helper, each tiny assistance, each moment of human connection that makes the impossible journey possible. He begins to understand that his labors, for all their cosmic significance, are not solo performances, but collaborative efforts. Even when he faced the Nemean Lion alone, wasn't he helped by all who had taught him to wrestle? When he cleaned the Augean Stables, wasn't he helped by every person who had ever shown him how water flows? When he captured the Ceryneian Hind, wasn't he helped by every hunter who had ever taught him patience? The road to Thrace, which should have been treacherous or militant depending on which path he chose, becomes instead something else entirely. By taking the third path, the wrong path, the path that led nowhere important, he has discovered something essential. The journey is not about reaching the destination by the shortest route, but about who we become along the way, who we meet, who we allow to help us, who we help in return. Days pass in this manner, each one bringing new helpers, new lessons, new opportunities to practice the difficult art of accepting assistance. A blacksmith repairs a bronze clasp without payment. A weaver provides thread to mend a tear. A cook shares soup that tastes of home, though Heracles no longer remembers where home might be. Each helper seems ordinary, forgettable, the kind of person history ignores in its rush to record the great deeds of great men. But Heracles begins to see them differently, to understand that they are the true architects of heroism, the invisible foundation upon which all great deeds rest. Without them, heroes would die of thirst on dusty roads, would lose their way at unmarked crossroads, would forget that they are human beings before they are legends. One evening, camping alone but not feeling alone, Heracles examines the water jar the boy gave him. It is cracked, he notices, held together by some kind of resin, repaired rather than replaced. This too is a teaching. We are all cracked vessels, holding together through improvised repairs, carrying what we can, offering what we have, helping each other continue the journey despite our imperfections. The stars emerge overhead, those eternal helpers that guide navigation, mark seasons, tell stories that help us understand our place in the vastness. They too are helpers met along dusty roads, even if those roads are the invisible paths light travels between distant suns and searching eyes. Everything helps everything else, Heracles realizes. The universe is not a collection of separate things, but a web of relationships, a network of assistance, a community of travelers all helping each other home. Tomorrow, he will reach Thrace. Tomorrow, he will face whatever labor awaits. Tomorrow, he will add another story to his legend. But tonight, he sits by his small fire, drinking water from a cracked jar given by a boy whose name he never asked, and understands something that all his divine strength could never have taught him. We are not heroes because we are strong. We are heroes because we continue. And we continue because along every dusty road, helpers wait, offering exactly what we need. If only we have the wisdom to accept it. Time moves differently now. Here in the deep reaches of night, where consciousness frays at its edges, where the boundary between sleeping and waking becomes permeable, where stories flow like underground rivers, sometimes surfacing, sometimes diving deep, always moving towards some distant sea of meaning. Heracles has completed his labors, all 12 of them, each one a universe of struggle and transformation. And now he faces the final ascent, the journey from mortality to whatever lies beyond. And it is quieter than the poets will claim, gentler than the songs will suggest, more profound than thunder, more lasting than lightning. As it was in the beginning, when he was simply a child too strong for his cradle, before the serpents came, before the madness came, before the labors came, there was a moment of pure potential, unstained by destiny. That moment echoes now, returns now, completes its circle now, as all things must return to their origin to understand their ending. The pyre has been built on Mount Oeta, wood gathered from sacred groves, each piece chosen with care, each arrangement precise, not for glory, but for necessity. This is not the dramatic immolation that storytellers will describe, not the heroic consumption by divine fire that artists will paint. This is quieter, more personal, more like going to sleep after a very long day than like ascending to godhood in a blaze of glory. Heracles sits beside the unlit pyre as the sun sets, wearing still the lion pelt that has become more than clothing, more than armor, more than symbol. It has become the physical manifestation of his journey, bearing in its worn surface every mile walked, every battle fought, every lesson learned. He thinks of removing it, of facing this final transformation as naked as he entered the world, but decides against it. The pelt has earned its place in whatever comes next. Philoctetes stands nearby, holding the torch that will light the pyre when the time comes. his young face marked by sorrow and incomprehension. He doesn't understand why this is necessary, why Heracles chooses this ending, why strength that could move mountains cannot overcome the poison that burns in his veins. The shirt of Nessus, they call it, though it was not the centaur's shirt, but his blood, his dying gift of vengeance delivered through the innocent hands of love. Must it be fire? Philoctetes asks, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might make this real, might transform possibility into actuality, might start something that cannot be stopped. Fire transforms, Heracles replies, his voice calm as deep water, steady as stone. It doesn't destroy, but changes. Wood becomes ash, becomes soil, becomes trees, becomes wood again. The cycle continues, just in different forms. I have been wood long enough. It's time to become something else. As it was in the beginning, when the oracle at Delphi spoke in riddles that contained truth wrapped in mystery. There is prophecy here, promise here, pattern here. The oracle said he would not die like other men, and this is not death as others experience it. This is transformation conscious of itself, change chosen rather than imposed, ascent achieved through descent, victory gained through surrender. The stars emerge one by one, those faithful witnesses to human drama, those eternal helpers that have guided his journey from the beginning. Leo rises, the lion he killed and wears, and has become. Hydra stretches across the southern sky, each star a head that regenerates eternally. Cancer scuttles sideways through the celestial sphere, small but persistent, earning its place through sheer determination to be part of the story. Tell me about after, Philoctetes says, still holding the unlit torch, still hoping perhaps that this moment might stretch forever, that the sun might choose not to set completely, that time might stop rather than force this ending. After is before, Heracles says, speaking in the language of mystery that comes naturally now, here at the threshold. Every ending is a beginning. Every death is a birth. Every ascent requires descent. Every hero must become human before they can become divine. He thinks of all the helpers met along dusty roads, all the small kindnesses that made the great labors possible, all the ordinary people who contributed to this extraordinary story without ever knowing their part in it. The boy with the water jar, did he ever realize that his simple gift sustained a hero through dark nights of doubt? Pythia, with her mending needle, did she know that her stitches held together more than just a lion pelt? The grandmother with her blind eyes that saw everything, did she understand that her words about accepting help changed the course of a divine destiny. As it was in the beginning, when Hera's hatred set this all in motion, there is completion now, resolution now, though not in the way anyone expected. The goddess who tormented him has also shaped him, has also created him, has also been essential to his becoming. Without her hatred, he would have remained simply strong. With it, he has become something more, tested, proven, transformed, ready for what comes next. The poison burns in his veins like liquid fire, Nessus's final revenge or final gift, depending on how one chooses to see it. It is killing him, yes, but it is also freeing him, breaking the bonds that tie him to mortality, burning away what is temporary to reveal what is eternal. Every moment of agony is also a moment of transformation. Every wave of pain is also a wave of change. Every heartbeat brings him closer to something that has no name, because language belongs to the mortal realm he is leaving behind. Light it, he says to Philoctetes, and his voice carries no fear, no regret, no hesitation. This is not surrender, but completion. Not defeat, but graduation. Not ending, but transformation. Philoctetes weeps as he brings the torch to the pyre, as the dry wood catches, as smoke begins to rise toward stars that seem to lean down to witness this moment. But his tears are not just for loss. They are for beauty, for completion, for the perfect closing of a circle that began in violence and ends in acceptance. The fire rises, but gently, not the consuming inferno of drama, but the steady warmth of transformation. Heracles lies back on the pyre as if on a bed, the lion pelt beneath him one last time. A golden bridge between what was and what will be. The smoke rises in spirals that seem to tell stories, seem to form shapes. A lion, a hydra, a hind with golden antlers, all the labors rising like memories made visible, released into the night sky to join their celestial counterparts. As it was in the beginning, when Zeus came to Alcmene in disguise, divine mixing with mortal to create something unprecedented. There is mixing now, mingling now, marriage now between the human and the divine. The fire doesn't consume but reveals, doesn't destroy but refines, doesn't end but transforms. Those watching from below, and there are many watching, drawn by something they cannot name. Some sense that this is important, that this matters, that this is a moment when the veil between worlds grows thin. They see something extraordinary. The smoke doesn't dissipate, but seems to climb, to have purpose, to know where it's going. And in the fire itself, the figure of Heracles becomes less solid, less defined, less bound by the laws that govern mortal flesh. Look, someone whispers, pointing to the sky where a new light appears, not quite star, not quite meteor, not quite anything that has a name. It rises from the pyre, or perhaps the pyre rises to meet it, or perhaps both happen simultaneously, the boundaries between earth and heaven becoming permeable, negotiable, transcendable. This is the quieter ascent than thunder would tell, the gentler transformation than lightning would suggest. No chariot of fire comes to carry him away. No divine hand reaches down to pluck him from mortality. Instead, he simply becomes less heavy, less solid, less here and more there, less mortal and more divine, less Heracles the man, and more Heracles the principle, the possibility, the promise that suffering can lead to transcendence, that labors can lead to rest, that even the most tragic beginning can have a divine ending. Philoctetes watches until the fire burns down to embers, until the embers cool to ash, until the ash is lifted by wind and scattered like seeds across the world. There is nothing left of the physical Heracles, nothing to bury, nothing to monument, nothing to prove he was ever here except the stories, except the changes he wrought, except the paths he walked that others now can follow. But in the sky, that new light remains, neither star nor planet, but something else, something between, something that partakes of both heaven and earth, both divine and mortal, both eternal and temporal. It will be there tomorrow night, and the night after, and all the nights to come. A quiet reminder that ascent is possible, that transformation is achievable, that the labors we undergo in life can become the very means of our transcendence. As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be. The story continues, not ending, but transforming, not concluding, but cycling back to start again, with each telling, each remembering, each recognition that we too walk dusty roads toward labors that seem impossible, that we too can find helpers if we know how to see them, that we too can achieve a quieter ascent than thunder would tell, gentler than lightning, deeper than glory, truer than fame. The crowd disperses slowly, each carrying away their own version of what they've witnessed, their own understanding of what it means. Some will say they saw a god born from fire. Others will say they saw a man finally find peace. Still others will say they saw nothing but smoke and dreams, and the human tendency to make meaning from mystery. All of them are right. All of them are wrong. All of them are part of the story now. Witnesses become participants. Observers become helpers along the dusty road of memory that transforms history into myth, myth into meaning, meaning into the eternal now, where every story is always beginning, always ending, always continuing. Now, in these deep hours, where night reaches its fullest expression, where time seems to pool rather than flow, where consciousness hovers at the edge of dreams, let us weave together all that we have witnessed, all that we have learned, all that has been revealed through these 7 aspects of a single story that is itself infinite in its implications. Like a weaver working by candlelight, taking threads that seemed separate and showing how they were always part of the same tapestry, we trace the connections that transform individual labors into a unified journey, individual moments into eternal meaning. Return first to the lion's pelt, that golden skin that became more than armor, more than identity, more than symbol. See how it connects to every other aspect of the story, how its invulnerability taught the need for different kinds of strength, how its weight required the cleansing waters to wash it clean, how its wearing marked Heracles as someone set apart, yet paradoxically brought him closer to those who recognized in his burden their own invisible weights. The pelt was present through every labor, accumulating meaning like it accumulated stains and tears and repairs, becoming a physical manifestation of transformation itself. The thing that changes by witnessing change, that transforms by enabling transformation. The rivers cleansed, tempers cooled. This was not just about the Augean Stables, not just about that single day when water was redirected to accomplish the impossible. It was about learning that force must sometimes yield to flow, that the mightiest strength must sometimes step aside and let nature take its course, that problems accumulated over decades cannot always be solved by direct assault, but require patience, intelligence, the wisdom to work with existing forces rather than against them. Every subsequent labor carried this lesson forward, the understanding that redirection is often more powerful than confrontation, that using what exists is often wiser than trying to create what doesn't. Consider how the labors as teachings, not tests, changes everything about how we understand this story. Eurystheus thought he was punishing, but the universe was teaching. Each impossible task was a doorway to new understanding. Each monster faced was an aspect of self to be integrated. Each journey to the edges of the world was also a journey inward to the center of meaning. The teaching continues even now, even in this telling, even in your listening, for the labors are eternal, always available to those who need to learn their lessons, always offering their wisdom to those who approach them seeking transformation rather than mere victory. The constellations, those stories pinned to stars, remind us that every earthly action has cosmic significance, that what we do here below is simultaneously being written above in lights that will outlast the earth itself. But more than that, they teach us about the relationship between the temporary and the eternal, between the specific and the universal, between the individual story and the collective myth. Heracles, the man, is gone, but Heracles, the constellation, wheels eternally overhead, not frozen, but dancing, not static, but dynamic, telling his story anew to each generation that looks up seeking meaning in the vast darkness, punctuated by points of light, atonement, rest, and human kindness. Perhaps the most profound teaching of all, the recognition that redemption comes not through suffering alone, but through the acceptance of grace. That rest is not weakness, but necessity. That human kindness is the force that makes all heroism possible. Without Pythia's mending needle, without the grandmother's wisdom, without the boy's water jar, all of Heracles' divine strength would have meant nothing. The helpers along dusty roads are the true heroes of this story. The ones who provide what is needed when it is needed, who offer assistance without requiring glory, who make the impossible journey possible through countless small acts of everyday grace. And now, the quieter ascent than thunder would tell. The transformation that comes not through violence, but through acceptance. Not through force, but through surrender. Not through holding on, but through letting go. See how this final transformation was prepared by everything that came before. How each labor taught a piece of the wisdom needed to choose transformation. How each helper provided a piece of the courage needed to release control. How each moment of the journey was leading to this moment when mortality transforms into something else. Not through external intervention, but through internal recognition of what was always possible. These 7 aspects are not separate stories, but 7 faces of a single crystal, 7 notes in a single chord, 7 colors in a single light refracted through the prism of narrative. Turn the crystal and see how each face reflects the others. Strike the chord and hear how each note requires the others for harmony. Pass the light through the prism and see how separation is an illusion that allows us to perceive what was always unified. The lion's pelt connects to the cleansing rivers, both teaching that transformation requires us to work with nature rather than against it. The rivers connect to the labors as teachings, both revealing that what seems like obstacle is actually opportunity. The labors connect to the constellations, both demonstrating that individual actions have universal significance. The constellations connect to atonement and rest, both showing that even the eternal requires pause, requires rhythm, requires the alternation between action and reflection. Atonement connects to the helpers, both proving that redemption is not a solitary achievement, but a communal grace. The helpers connect to the quiet ascent, both confirming that true transformation happens not in isolation, but in relationship, not through solo effort, but through accumulated assistance. And all of it, every aspect, every labor, every moment circles back to the beginning while simultaneously spiraling forward to the end, creating not a line but a spiral, not a journey but a dance, not a story but a truth that transcends narrative even while requiring narrative to be conveyed. This is the eternal cycle, not closure, but continuation. Heracles dies and is born, ascends and remains, leaves and returns, ends and begins. His story is complete, and yet it continues every time someone faces an impossible task, every time someone chooses transformation over stagnation, every time someone accepts help along a dusty road, every time someone looks up at the stars and sees not distant lights, but connected meaning, not isolated points, but constellations of significance. The fire that transformed Heracles burns still, not on Mount Oeta, but in every moment of chosen change, every decision to grow rather than merely endure, every recognition that we are all walking the path of labors, all wearing our own invisible pelts, all needing our own rivers of cleansing, all deserving our own moments of rest and grace and human kindness. As the night deepens toward its furthest point from dawn, as consciousness dissolves into dream, as the boundaries between story and reality become permeable, understand this. You too are Heracles. You too face labors that seem impossible. You too wear the pelt of your past victories and defeats. You too need the cleansing waters of transformation. You too can read your story in the stars. You too deserve rest and kindness along your journey. You too meet helpers if you know how to see them. You too can achieve that quieter ascent than thunder would tell. Now we arrive at the threshold of dawn, though it is still hours away. That liminal time when night has exhausted its darkness, but day has not yet gathered its light. When the world exists in a state of pure potential, neither sleeping nor waking, neither ending nor beginning, but something more essential, more eternal, more true than either state alone can contain. The story of Heracles that we have traveled together through this long night is complete, but not finished, told but not exhausted, ended but not concluded. Like the hero himself, it has undergone transformation through the telling, has become something more than its individual parts, has achieved its own kind of ascent from mere narrative to living truth that breathes in the space between speaker and listener, between then and now, between myth and meaning. Think back to where we began, so many hours ago, so many words ago, so many transformations ago. We spoke of a man destroyed by divine madness, broken by unbearable guilt, seeking redemption through labors that seemed designed to destroy rather than restore. That man is gone now, not destroyed, but transformed, not erased, but evolved, not forgotten, but remembered in a way that transcends memory itself. Each labor was a death and a rebirth. The man who strangled the Nemean Lion died in that cave, and someone new emerged wearing the pelt of his conquered fear. The man who redirected rivers died in that act of wisdom over strength, and someone new emerged who understood that power comes in many forms. The man who pursued the sacred hind for a year died in that patient following, and someone new emerged who knew that some things can only be captured by being worthy of their surrender. Again and again, death and rebirth, ending and beginning, descent and ascent, until the final transformation on Mount Oeta was not a singular event, but the culmination of countless smaller transformations, the visible manifestation of an invisible process that had been occurring all along. This is the deepest teaching of the myth, the secret hidden in plain sight, the truth that the ancient storytellers encoded in narrative for us to discover when we were ready. We are always dying and being reborn, always ending and beginning, always transforming whether we recognize it or not. The question is not whether we will change. Change is the nature of existence itself. The question is whether we will participate consciously in our transformation, whether we will choose our deaths and births, whether we will approach our labors as punishments or as teachings. In the quietest part of night, when the world holds its breath before the turn toward dawn, we can hear the truth that daylight obscures with its noise and motion and demanding presence. We are all walking the path of labors. We all carry burdens that seem unbearable. We all face monsters that seem invincible. We all need helpers. We're too proud to acknowledge. We all deserve rest. We're too driven to accept. We all have stories written in stars we're too busy to read. But here, now, in this space we've created together through the long journey of this night, we can see differently, understand differently, be different. The story of Heracles is not about a half-god who lived 3,000 years ago in a world that no longer exists. It is about you, about me, about everyone who has ever faced the impossible and continued anyway, about everyone who has ever been broken and found a way to become whole in a new configuration, about everyone who has ever discovered that strength alone is not enough, that wisdom alone is not enough, that nothing alone is enough, because we are not meant to be alone. The helpers along dusty roads are all around us, offering their water jars and wisdom, their mending needles and guidance, their simple presence that reminds us we are part of something larger than our individual struggles. Every person we meet is potentially a helper if we have the humility to accept what they offer, the wisdom to recognize that help comes in many forms, the grace to understand that receiving is as sacred as giving. The constellations wheel overhead every night, telling their eternal stories to anyone who takes the time to look up, to see pattern in randomness, meaning in vastness, connection in isolation. Our stories, too, are being written in lights we cannot always see, in patterns we cannot always recognize, in meanings that will only become clear when someone in the future looks back and traces the connections we're too close to perceive. Rest is not a luxury, but a necessity, not a weakness, but a wisdom, not an ending, but a preparation for what comes next. In rest, we integrate what we've learned. In rest, we heal what's been wounded. In rest, we prepare for the next transformation. Even now, in this deep night, you are resting, allowing these words to wash over you like those rivers that clean the Augean Stables, not forcing understanding, but allowing it to flow through you, carrying away what no longer serves, leaving behind what nourishes growth. And when transformation comes, as it always does, as it must, it may not arrive with thunder and lightning, with divine chariots and heavenly fanfare. It may come quietly, gently, like smoke rising from a pyre, like consciousness shifting from one state to another, like sleep becoming dream, becoming wake, becoming something else entirely. The quieter ascent is often the truest, the most lasting, the most profound. As this long night's journey nears its end, as words begin to fade into silence, as the story completes its circle while opening into spiral, remember this. Every ending is a doorway. Every completion is a commencement. Every conclusion is a transformation waiting to unfold. The story of Heracles ends with ascension, but ascension is not escape from the human condition. It is the human condition fully realized, fully accepted, fully transformed into what it always had the potential to become. You have been on a journey tonight, though your body has been still. You have faced labors, though they were made of listening rather than action. You have been transformed, though the change may be too subtle to immediately perceive. Like Heracles, you have worn the pelt of attention through these long hours. You have been cleansed by the rivers of story. You have pursued the uncatchable hind of meaning through the forest of words. You have seen your own story reflected in the stars of ancient myth. You have rested in the kindness of shared narrative. You have met helpers in the form of every image, every metaphor, every connection that sparked recognition in your drowsing consciousness. And now, you too approach a quieter ascent than thunder would tell. Dawn will come, as it always does, painting the world in colors that have no names, only feelings. You will wake, as you always do, returning from the far countries of sleep to the familiar territory of daily life. But you will carry with you something from this journey, some seed planted in the fertile darkness of night, some transformation begun in the safety of story, some recognition that you too are living a myth, walking a hero's journey, approaching your own labors with whatever combination of strength and wisdom, courage and acceptance, determination and grace you can muster. The mythical time we have inhabited together, these past hours, where everything is always happening, where all stories are one story, where transformation is always possible, doesn't end with dawn. It continues, parallel to ordinary time, accessible whenever we remember to look for it, whenever we recognize that we are not just living life but living myth, not just completing tasks but completing labors, not just meeting people but meeting helpers, not just surviving but transforming. Heracles ascended, yes, but he also remains. He remains in every moment of chosen courage. He remains in every act of accepting help. He remains in every recognition that our struggles have meaning beyond their immediate pain. He remains in every person who faces the impossible and continues anyway. He remains in you, has always been in you, will always be in you, not as an external presence, but as an internal possibility, a pattern available for activation, a path worn smooth by countless followers, each adding their own footsteps to the way. Let the last words dissolve now into pure atmosphere, into the breathing of night, into the slow rhythm of sleep approaching or deepening or transforming into dream. Let the images of lions and rivers, hinds and stars, helpers and ascensions spiral through your consciousness like smoke from an ancient fire, carrying prayers and promises upward toward whatever receives such offerings. Know that you have been seen tonight, not by me, for I am just words arranged in patterns, but by the story itself, by the myth that recognizes in you its own continuation, its own expression, its own eternal return. You are part of the great story now, have always been part of it, will always be part of it. Your labors matter. Your transformations are witnessed. Your ascent, however quiet, however gentle, however different from what thunder would tell, is already written in stars that someone someday will look up and read, finding in your story the strength to continue their own journey through the labors that lead to transformation. Sleep now, if sleep is where you're heading, or wake now, if waking is what comes next. Either way, you carry with you the gift of story, the blessing of myth, the recognition that you are both the teller and the tale, both the hero and the helper, both the one who struggles and the one who transcends, both Heracles and yourself, both human and divine, both ending and beginning, both always arriving and always home. The circle closes, the spiral continues, the story ends, the story begins. Again, always, forever, now.